Let's do a roll call.
Okay, Mayor Jacobs,
Here.
Committeeman Hickey,
Here.
Mr. Strakoff,
Here.
Mr. Travellini is absent as of right now. Mr. Rodelius,
Here.
Mr. Leonard,
Here.
Mr. DiGiovanni. I can see you, Lou, but I can't hear you.
Lou.
I don't know why.
Here.
Great, thank you. Yep, Mr. Zupnik,
Present.
Ms. Orabana,
Here.
Mr. Walter,
Here.
Chairwoman Gutschall.
Here.
Adequate notice of this meeting of the Bedminster Township Land Use Board was filed with the Township Clerk and sent to the Bernardsville News and to the Courier News and to all subscribers, and posted at the Township Municipal Building, 1 Miller Lane, Bedminster, New Jersey, on January 16th, 2020.
Flag salute.
To the flag.
United States
United
of America.
America.
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
One nation,
under God,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
for all.
I think we're getting worse again.
Not good.
I stayed muted. You can't blame me.
And Rich just joined us.
Oh, good. Okay.
Hi, Rich.
Evening, Mr. T.
Hi, guys.
Hey.
You want to put Paul on large screen? Full screen? Rich, if you haven't noticed, just look over Paul's shoulder.
Oh, there you go, Paul. Are you an ND grad, Paul, or are you just by, some other affiliation?
I'm not a grad. My son is, and my brother is, but
Oh,
so
okay.
I've paid for a bit of that mural.
All right.
Nice. Got to have some skin in the game.
Ooh.
Uh-oh.
Well, there's a lot of, a lot of Irishmen and Catholics who are Notre Dame fans because of some, spiritual obligation, I think.
I just like the uniforms.
All right, guys. I'm going to open it up to the public for anyone that might have any comment that's not on the agenda tonight. Do we see anybody? Janine?
There are no hands raised. Hold on, let me just double check on the side. I don't see any visual ones.
Okay.
No, we do not have any hands raised.
Okay. All right. We have minutes that we need to approve from October 29th. If I have a motion.
So
This is Scott, seconded.
Okay, so Nick and Scott, thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any abstain? I think everyone was here.
Yep.
So a motion is approved. We have also some correspondence. I guess this is on the legislative bill promoting the equine farm housing. Tom, do you have comments on that, or is it just the correspondence?
Yeah, I think we should have, I do have some comments, but I think we should talk about a little bit.
Okay.
So this is a very strange statute or bill that's proposed. And when bills get proposed, you sometimes wonder whether it's worth it to even review them if they have no traction, no likelihood of adoption. But this one might be close to your hearts because it doesn't really respect what I would call normal municipal perspectives on farm housing. doesn't really even give you a help to understand what it is that the proponents of this bill hope to achieve by authorizing the State Agricultural Development Commission to basically preempt all local ordinances on health, safety, and regulatory powers of housing for workers on a equestrian farm. And if you read it, you have to wonder what it is that they hope to achieve by this and how far do they expect to go with this. So it might be something for the subcommittee to look at, to talk about offline a little bit. If you think about it as a lawyer, you sort of see these potential major problems with it, including dormitory housing on septic with no sewage treatment and unlimited numbers and no reasonable code enforcement, things that don't make sense, even if it was theoretically desired by someone. And in Bedminster, you already have a very flexible program to obtain an accessory dwelling unit for at least one farm worker and their family, including an equestrian farm worker. And, do you really need more than that? And quite frankly, if somebody really needed more than that, they could ask for a D variance to the board as a zoning board and perhaps get it, but they should demonstrate those things that most people would think would be customary for housing, even for temporary housing. So, so I don't know. I don't know if it has a lot of support. It was picked up by Larry, and I noticed it too in a blog we get as environmental attorneys called Environmental Politic or something like that, which is a pretty knowledgeable source, but it also basically says they don't know where it's how much support it has. But somebody supported it, introduced it. It made it to a committee. I imagine there are horse farmers who support it somehow, but it could be something you want to comment on or recommend to the township committee that they comment on it. But I think we need some review by maybe the subcommittee and maybe Frank and me, and just talk about it with the subcommittee offline a little bit. But Larry, maybe you have ideas too. I don't know whether you've thought about it.
So as Tom said, this came across my desk in my professional capacity, and first thing I did is flipped it over to Tom and Frank to see if they had any insight in it. That the bill did go before the assembly. There's a parallel bill in the Senate, so it does have some legs. Probably too early to tell whether it's going to advance further, but I'm actually looking at the New Jersey legislative site right now, and it shows it having gone through the Assembly Committee with 6 yes votes, no votes. And so it's going to continue its way through the legislative process. And what I found interesting about it is that essentially it would allow equine farms, to completely bypass the municipal land use law and allow what's called equine-related farm employees to be housed on farms. They still would have to go for construction and zoning and health compliance, but they would not have to go before the planning board or zoning board for construction and occupancy of those units. And I'm not quite sure how this gets enforced. I'm not even, as Tom was saying, it's not even quite sure that it it's a legitimate way of getting around the MLUL. So if you can have horse farms house employees, how is that enforced? How does that not become apartments if the employees leave? Because the farm operators would be allowed to build, they'd be allowed to build units. Units go on the farm. Maybe there's a farm worker there. What sort of registry is there to compare it against? And it just seems to me that this could present problems for Bedminster on the equine properties. And so it made sense to me to run it by the planning board and see if there were comments or it's something that we do want to intervene either from the land use board capacity or from the township committee, make a recommendation back to the township committee to send a comment back to the sponsors and our assembly people to see if they want to look a little further into it. So that's where we are today.
Well, what I noticed, it looks like it's being sponsored by South Jersey.
Yes.
If I'm reading correctly.
Yep.
So, I mean, I guess it wouldn't hurt to put our opinion into our legislators.
Didn't we have a variance we granted to a gentleman who wanted his grooms people to be able to stay in the stables, and he was building apartments for them a couple of years ago?
Yes.
So we grant variances on a case by case in this situation in our town at this point already. This seems to be like superfluous. There's got to be some reason, right?
Yeah, Scott, it is odd, but it is probably under a theory of kind of strange, but equine farming should be favored more than other farming, and that it should be that the state should preempt the local authority to determine whether housing for workers will be allowed on any horse farm, any commercial.
And if you had somebody who was living on site taking care of somebody's cows or sheep, they can't stay there.
And under this draft, that wouldn't be authorized for this SADC to change. That might be the next bill. And but worse than that, it really is a bill with no standards. It's basically saying, okay, go ahead, SADC, ignore the towns and you decide.
Tom, is it about the workers being allowed to live in the same building with the horses, whereas right now they have to be in a separate building?
Well, that's theoretically part of it, but when you read the fine print, it's clear that they're also being authorized to focus on housing outside the barn or in a different building. And because they're saying that they would basically have this authority to override and preempt local regulatory power, and isn't just zoning, it's pretty massive. The concept is massive. I don't quite get it, but basically somehow they would override and be able to change septic regulations as related to these structures, and somehow they'd be allowed to not comply with the farm labor standards, which are, decades of protection of farm laborers. And I don't know. It's surprising to me that.
So the Board of Health and township engineer and things like that wouldn't apply either?
That's what they're trying to say the SADC could change by the rules of the state agency. And so my instincts would be maybe at least look at it, see whether you want to make a general policy recommendation for the township committee to state to the legislators of the area and to the
Tom,
state legislature. You know, when you do that, you have to sort of make it.
how to use this new process here.
What would
How do you-
something
how
like
do you-
that even look like, Tom?
How does our commenting work look like? Or how does their program look like?
Our comment, or,
Okay.
and how would it be addressed, that sort of thing?
So what you normally do, if you want to do much, is you try to list and put in a resolution that the committee might send to the legislature of the opposition or the concerns of the Township of Bedminster. You usually advise the Township Committee, and the Township Committee usually is the body that reaches out to the legislature or to third parties and, you know, gives them comments or opposition if they're ready to do that. And it usually has a bunch of whereases and a resolution that describe the problems that the township perceives with it. So, but I think it needs a little, think you somehow, it's a little hard to do without, you know, getting policy direction from the majority of you. And so one idea is maybe maybe the subcommittee, or maybe we try to draft something that Frank and I draft and Larry works on, and we pass it around and then have it at a next meeting or something like that. Or it doesn't look like this is going to happen overnight. So, and these things, that's why I say we don't really know why it's being sought. It's probably somebody really wants to have a big dormitory on their horse farm or something. So
It seems a little half-baked to me.
it seems, yeah, it seems
I have,
What
three quarters baked.
what would be driving
I have
them
a
to go
question.
around the local channels? I mean, that's what I'm, and the protections that are part of it. You know, that's what my concern is with it. Go ahead, Rick.
are you all getting this feedback?
What
Um,
feedback?
I have to admit, I know nothing about equine farming, so I'm hesitant to even ask a question. But it seems to me that in this age where we're constantly regulating, this is kind of a laissez-faire approach to this particular aspect of farming, equine farming, and I don't understand what makes them so special. How's that different from somebody who has an apple orchard or that needs to be picked, you know, seasonally or any other way? And am I wrong in kind of?
No, you're right, but
Special
if you,
consideration here. And the last question that I have, is this some way for certain farmers to be able to be more competitive in terms of their labor costs because they want to, you know, they want to import labor from some foreign country without anybody knowing about it? Leave it to
all
me.
good questions, Rich. All good questions, Rich, but basically we don't know. And that's, you know, that's one of the comments that might be made. But frankly, Larry's got the best point is that, you know, once you allow structures to be built, particularly dormitories or apartments, it is extremely hard for anyone, including the owner of the property, to control the tenancies and to evict and eject occupants. It's one of the toughest areas of real estate law to sort of prohibit people from holding over or occupying after their job is lost or occupying improperly, or so the whole overall picture, I don't think it would be better if it was for all farms. It's a problem in general to sort of ignore decades of regulatory health and safety rules that, and labor laws, which they're being exempt from as well, which we're made to protect the public health and safety of not only the municipality, but of the workers. So it's like an atom bomb to solve some sort of a problem. Like, why can't you just go get your variance? You know, if you have such a big farm that you need 10 horsemen and women, groomsmen, ask the town that you're in for permission, like the example you gave, Scott, or there are a few complying accessory dwelling units on 14+ acre properties in Bedminster. It's, so, but horse people probably, there may be horse farmers who would absolutely love this because they could bring their grooms people to, from Florida to New Jersey for the summer months and back to Florida for the winter months. And they probably are very good to their workers, I hope. So, but I don't think you need this overkill preemption by the state ag board. It's strange position. So maybe what we could do is maybe a good way to approach it is maybe me, Frank, and Larry try to do a draft that the subcommittee could look at. And then if that subcommittee likes it, then go full board, and then board recommends it, recommend it to the township committee for the township committee to do. That's an idea. I don't know if Frank has any ideas on this, if he's seen any real efforts for something like this.
The only thing I would say is that having tried to influence draft legislation in the past, the thing we really want to do is impress upon whoever's reading it that not just does it usurp municipal authority, it creates the opportunity for health or safety hazards that don't seem to be thought out at all. This basically says, if the legislature approved this, I could go into town hall tomorrow and get a building permit to put apartments in my barn. I don't have a barn, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I think that the kind of comments that we want to come back with, and Tom's right, we should give you a draft to look at and we'll take it from there. But we would want to try to impress upon the legislature that even though they can shove this down our throat, they also need to consider these other important public health and safety considerations.
Frank, to that point, our fire officials are being asked by the state to be, to inspect the buildings and the facilities and be much more comprehensive in their surveys of farm buildings and the outbuildings right now. So this would almost run counter to that. It would seem to usurp their authority in that respect.
Or exempt these activities from that authority. Yeah, you're right. It's definitely a counterpoint.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I agree with Frank that is and that is a very big part of it. That's my one reason why the legislature might step back, not adopt it.
Tom, if you think of this in reverse, I don't know, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
If you think of this in reverse, you could have a 10-acre piece of property and decide to make it a horse farm so that you could put apartments on it.
Yeah.
It's like, what comes first, the horse farm or the apartments?
Right.
Well, and I think to Lou's point and to Larry's concern, I have seen other municipalities, Bernardsville pops to mind, that required landowners to submit yearly affidavits as to who was living in the grandfathered in apartments on the property if there were restrictions that it was limited to people working or family, right? There are ways for the township to sort of monitor that. And Tom's point that the owner doesn't always have entire control over who is squatting and holding over in their property, they can at least be required to tell the township who is there and what's going on.
Yeah, I agree. But what happened in this bill, I'm pretty sure it actually gives an exemption from allowing a town to require registration, which I find amazing because everybody has to register their tenancies, including, mom and pop. They just don't do it, So
Really helpful to figure out.
Somebody's gotten, somebody's really gone too far. That one is odd.
Mm-hmm.
Can we impose on our equine farms an independent obligation to submit certifications annually as to whether or not they have tenants, whether they're paying tenants or not?
this bill would override any such ordinances, even if you adopted one.
Hmm.
That's how draconian it reads.
So this
So
probably
the answer
really
is,
shouldn't
yes,
happen.
What's that?
This probably really shouldn't be passed. This does not
Probably
seem like
not,
it's
not in its
a,
current form at least, but that's up to the policymakers, you and the committee, not me. And then you ask the legislatures to realize that. I said to Larry, is there really a big problem? I don't really appreciate the problem. I mean, if you pay your worker, you know, I don't know, you pay your workers enough to live in their own place and come to your farm every day. That's what it comes down to, and there's nothing wrong with that. And we're one of the few towns that has any accessory unit as a permissive use for a farm worker on the farm for farm work for one unit on 14 acres with a main house with 14 acres at least by conditional use. And we do require information about who uses it. And we do require them to be a worker, and that is enforceable, but would not be after this, you know, this preemptive state statute, if the SADC were to declare by regulation that anybody could have any kind of dormitory on a horse farm in the barn, or it looks like they could allow it outside the barn to me, although the idea is to have it in the barn on a different floor or different space. So I jokingly said that I'd be glad to live at the USET horse barn
That's a nice one.
and do my therapy there.
So what happens if somebody new comes in, opens up one of these farms that fits under this description, and for construction, they don't have to follow any of the land use laws, and the septic is done incorrectly and the runoff is done incorrectly? What happens to all the people around it? You know?
Complain to the SADC. Do you think that'll do any good? No.
Just did.
They'll complain to Larry and you and Paul,
Mhm.
and they'll blame the town.
Mhm. Even though
And
the town has no
town will
authority.
have no authority. That's how strange it is. It's so strange. I mean, I guess they're frustrated or something. Somebody's frustrated they can't get their dormitory in a barn.
Yeah.
So
Well,
they
this
won't.
is far from passing. Why wouldn't we just talk to our state legislator and express our concerns?
That's what you do. But the
They've
way
got
you
their
do it,
attention is fishy, though, is my point. I mean, unless the big group of people. Why are the legislators even considering?
Well, I don't think they
guessing-
all are. It's just a small group right now, right?
Wow.
well, if it was introduced, people signed it and reached the subcommittee, and 6 people apparently voted it out of committee. I mean, that's movement. I don't understand it either. I mean, basically, that's why I said it probably is some horse farmer wants to have some apartments in their barn or next to their barn, and
And you give a nice donation to the legislator, and this is what he's
whatever.
doing.
Or maybe the legislature has a horse farm. Huh?
Yeah.
In the town that it's
Not
in,
to
it's
criticize. I
cooperating.
mean, I don't know.
Right.
And people can ask for all kinds of stuff. And the legislature can do all kinds of things, and that's why is it really worth our time? I would say I don't know. I just don't know. It is a little odd, and the state ag board does preempt things on other matters. So if this does have traction, it could become something that basically overrides local municipal review and approval.
Well, let's tell them we don't like it.
That's what you do in this kind of resolution. And I mean, if the board is ready, I think we need to draft up, like Frank was talking about, some reasons why, and focus on the negative health and safety consequences of this type of.
I like that. Well-reasoned argument is always best.
Yeah, it probably will help.
Maybe you wanted to say something?
Yeah, Tom, if actually you look at the Senate bill, so the Senate bill is, let's see, the Senate bill was introduced back, I think, maybe in June, but it looks like, no, I'm sorry, it was introduced in the Senate in February. reported out from the committee with amendments. And according to this, was passed by the Senate in July and went back to the Assembly, which is the current version that we're looking at right now. So the reason I run through that history is that the Senate voted, sent it back to the Assembly, and now the Assembly is at least the one committee responded favorably to it. So there may be a little more traction to this legislation than.
I'm just worth talking to Tom Kane about it. Even if he's in the Senate, maybe he knows something about it,
Yeah, we can, and
Yeah,
I can do
reach
that.
out to
I can
him.
certainly.
Yeah.
do.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, even just talking to them and expressing their concern is going to make a difference, but, and they might be able to help know how much traction it has and how soon comments are needed. But if the board's ready, you want to maybe authorize me, Frank, and Larry to work with the subcommittee to draft recommendation to the township committee?
So
Yeah.
moved.
Okay.
Second, yeah.
Yes,
Wait, excuse me, I just have a comment. I mean, when you look at the goal from the Assembly people, the goal of the bill seems like a good goal. Which is to get the farm workers closer to the horses. So, I mean, it seems like, Tom, what you're talking about, all the negative things, certainly wouldn't be good for us, but the overall goal sounds like a good goal for the bill.
Yes, it may, although I'm not quite impressed that you have to have many workers living in the barn.
Right.
Why can't they drive? Or why can't you pick them up in your van? So
Well, Tom, I mean, you're not an equine person, so
I know I'm not, but I'm telling
I
you
mean,
that.
I just think if that's
But
the
here's what they're
goal-
doing, George. They're saying.
Excuse me. If that's the goal of the bill and the spirit of it, I
No,
mean, I
that is
think
not
we
the-
should learn more about that.
Okay.
Certainly the negative aspects we have to keep in mind. That's all I'm saying.
Understood.
Well, I mean, then to George's point, then maybe one of our approaches is, well, let's make sure we protect ourselves from some of these negative things if they're going to proceed with this bill, even if it's meant to do good things. Maybe that's an approach.
I don't know. It seems to me like even Somerset County runs a barn over at Lord Sterling Stable. They got 80 horses there. Nobody lives there. Nobody spends a night there. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you've got a couple of $1 million in thoroughbreds, I guess you might want somebody to stay overnight with your horses. I get that, but there would have to be, those kinds of circumstances, and should almost be on a case by case.
Wow, that's why the town does this stuff in the first place.
I would be in favor of having a group talk to our legislators and express what our concerns are. I mean, every town is different. Maybe in South Jersey, this is a problem. Maybe towns aren't allowing, equine people to have staff there. We're different. Maybe we should express that and tell them that, it shouldn't be one fits all.
Yeah.
Well, that's the point, Tim. I think you hit it, because I think it shouldn't be just widespread. We do
Yeah.
have concerns, and we feel that we have a different opinion than what's in here. So, yeah, I think we should follow up on this, Tom.
Okay, so, and I appreciate what everybody's saying, including you, George, about the stated goal. And goals, this is common for a statute to have goals, but then the words of the statute are so far afield of or they offer so much more than what the goal requires. That's why I call it like an atom bomb. It's basically, there shall be no regulation of this type of housing by the town. That doesn't make sense. So.
No, that doesn't pass the smell test, right, Tom?
Right. So you sometimes have to to point that out, especially where you already know this industry and you provide an opportunity that they may not even realize is provided in any town. Maybe the town that this person is seeking doesn't allow accessory units. So why don't they ask for that? Did they add what, you know, if they really have, like Scott pointed out, if they really have a good case for why they need housing, why don't they ask for a variance for it? So that could be recommended in the resolution as well. So, you know, we need more detail. Unfortunately, it doesn't give us much detail. So why don't we work on it with the subcommittee? And you don't have to make a formal vote now. We, you know, the committee has authority to act independently of the planning board anyway. So if there's something urgent comes up, the mayor and the committee can just you know, express an opinion quickly. But we'll try to work quickly with Paul, mostly Frank and me and Larry, I think.
Okay, let's,
Okay.
we have the resolution that we talked about last time, protocols for remote public meeting. I guess that's back with you again, Tom?
Yes, again, this is just something that is helpful to you to provide cover for why you allowed to have remote meetings. I was satisfied that you were allowed to have it without this regulation required by the DCA, but the DCA in its infinite wisdom has adopted a emergency rule as if in effect and said, if you would like to have remote meetings, you should do this type of resolution. So that being said, I would recommend it to you. It doesn't restrict you from using different things besides Zoom or WebEx or whatever. So it doesn't require you now to say which remote technology you're going to use for each meeting. So Colin, I wouldn't recommend putting that you shall use WebEx and you shall use Zoom and you shall do these steps to get into Zoom and you shall do this to raise your hand, because that doesn't need to be in the resolution, but it could be in a protocol that's on our website and in our notice and in the agenda, and that's not prohibited by this. That way, if you change to WebEx or you change to Microsoft Teams, you don't need to change your resolution.
You had asked a question, Mayor. I had raised the issue last week because when I looked over the guidelines and the protocol that were distributed last time, well, I look at number 4, it says we have to provide a telephonic conference line, meaning if somebody doesn't have access to a computer, they should still have the opportunity to participate in the meeting via an audio call, a telephone call, and be able to raise their hand and make comments. So, and Tom, I agree with you 100%. We shouldn't put that in, bake it into the resolution, but we should make sure on the website and in our notices, including like the notice we have tonight for the meeting, for folks to be able to provide and participate via telephone only. And I think Janine did some research with respect to Zoom in terms of how you raise your hand on a telephone or an audio only call. It's a *9, but we need to include that in our protocol. We need to include that as we give instructions to the public so that they can participate if in fact they're not using the PC to access the meeting.
I agree with that.
Yeah, that sounds right. This is a little more general, so that.
Yeah, definitely for the resolution,
Yes.
we don't need to bake in all that, but for the website, for the materials we hand out, and for
Right.
Janine or Robin or whoever is running a meeting, let's make sure we mention to the public the different ways that they can participate in it.
Right, that makes total sense. So we want to have a motion. Does anybody have any questions regarding this from the board? No? Okay. Should I open it up to the public again, Tom, or?
Yes, you might as well. I don't, just be careful.
Okay, well, we will. We'll open it up if the public has any questions regarding this resolution.
I do not see any hands raised.
No hands raised. Okay, so then I guess we need a motion to approve the resolution. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Seconded.
And Scott is seconding.
Jeff and Scott?
I think it was Colin Scott.
Colin
Thank you.
Yeah.
I need a roll call.
Mayor Jacobs?
Aye.
Committeeman Hickey?
Aye.
Mr. Strackhoff?
Aye.
Mr. Travellini?
He's muted.
You're
Aye.
muted. Mr. Rodelius?
Aye.
Mr. Leonard?
Aye.
Mr. DeGiovanni?
Aye.
Mr. Zupnik?
Aye.
Ms. Urbana?
Aye.
Mr. Walter?
Aye.
Chairwoman Gutschall?
Motion approved. Okay, we have Paul, we have B and D Associates. You want to speak about the application?
Sure, Madam Chairman. This is an application for a property at 336 Main Street. The board may remember that a number of years ago, there was an application for this property where there was an authorization to use this barn at the rear of the building for storage accessory to the office tenants in the front building. The current application is for permission to use that storage barn as, for all intents and purposes, a warehouse, a small warehouse, obviously, for offsite storage for potential tenants who do not have office space in the building. Therefore, it's a D variance, creating an additional principal use on the property. I wrote a letter dated November 5th regarding the completeness of this application. It's my opinion that there are a few things that the board really needs in order to be able to make a determination on this application. For example, they haven't submitted any site plan, so to speak, which may not necessarily be required to review it, but at least we need a survey that's to scale. So we have some concept of how much parking can be on there, how the circulation can happen, et cetera. I also think there should be at least a minimal key map if the board is not going to require a full one as is normally required, by means of submitting a tax map so the board has a perspective of what's around the property, because I think that's something to be considered as the application goes forward. There are a couple of other waivers that I think are possible, but when we come down towards the end of my letter, it's my opinion that architectural plans should be submitted, because there's a note that there will be a bathroom added to this building. A bathroom added to the building, in my opinion, means that there's going to be some occupancy of that building for some extended period of time, whether it be hours or whatever. And that means there's going to be changes to the floor plan of the building. There's a second floor in the barn, et cetera. So I think it's important that we get some more information so the board understands exactly the scope and how this structure will function. So based on all the above, it's my opinion that the application is incomplete at this point and additional information needs to be provided.
Yeah, sounds that way, Paul. Sounds like you need more information.
So Paul, would you recommend a motion for the board to deem incomplete and to require those things that you determined should be provided?
Yes, the items that are outlined in my November 6th letter.
Okay,
Yeah.
so board members, is there a motion to deem the application incomplete and to require the additional items to be provided as stated in Paul's letter?
So moved.
Is there a
Second,
second?
second,
And a roll call vote, please, Janine.
Mayor Jacobs?
Aye.
Committeeman Hickey?
Aye.
Mr. Strackhoff?
Aye.
Mr. Travellini?
Aye.
Mr. Vogelius?
Aye.
Mr. Leonard?
Aye.
Mr. DeGiovanni?
aye.
Mr. Zupnik?
Aye.
Ms. Urbana?
Aye.
Mr. Walter?
Aye.
Chairwoman Gutschall?
Aye. Motion is approved. Okay. Okay, we can move on to our master plan review. And I believe that that's where we are with Frank. Your
Yes, Madam Chair, this is a latest draft of the ordinance for the ORV mixed-use zone, which is being created for Block 71, Lot 7, known as Bedminster 1. The ordinance provides that there are opportunities for mixed-use development, including multifamily housing or apartments in buildings that could include offices or retail, and that multi-use buildings can occupy portions of the site that remain undeveloped from the prior use of the site, which obviously is the Bedminster 1 office building. One of the questions that's come up when we look at the accessory uses that are permitted here, let me say first that this is in the VN zone area, even though it's not in the VN zone. The uses permitted in the VN zone are permitted by this zone. So commercial, office, all those other uses that are allowed are included automatically in this. But what we're really trying to create here is the mixed use concept that we've talked about that may have some remote elements. In other words, it'll be a mixed use building or buildings combined, but there may be these retail or pavilion elements out near the street that are separate from the rest of the building complex. So part of what we need to think about is how we regulate those spaces, because we really want to move them pretty close to the street as opposed to far back at a setback that would permit the parking and whatever else goes in the front.
Oh, no, we lost him.
Oh, we lost you, Frank.
Yes.
Okay, I think we got you back.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you miss anything? Did I cut out?
I think you're okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so one of the things we've talked about is that there's a retail pavilion that would be a freestanding building, even though this is a mixed-use development. There's nothing in the ordinance yet, as I've drafted it, that identifies that as a permitted accessory use or some kind of special use as part of the plan. But I would recommend that we include that because I think everybody felt that that was a valuable feature that engages the streetscape and pedestrians and makes it more walkable and creates opportunities for a more diverse mix of retail, office, and outdoor areas to congregate. So it doesn't include that, but it does include a series of typical accessory uses that are pretty much permitted in similar types of zones, particularly in the ORV zones, which this was crafted out of. The maximum building height, according to this proposal, would be 55 feet. Now, some of the standards that you see here have been developed in concert with KRE and understanding what it is they're trying to build and what it takes to build that. So 55 feet sounds pretty high. 45 feet, I believe, was the height limit in the OR zone before anything was changed. But in any event, if we're talking about the type of development that has been the subject of these discussions, 55 feet is a reasonable height for a 3-story building. And certainly, if there are areas where it has to go to 4 stories on the residential portion, that would allow that. So I haven't suggested yet that there can be 4 stories. We have to hear more from the developer about that. We also have a maximum building size and some architectural compatibility factors we're talking about here. There is a standard in the ORV zone that requires that no building can exceed 40,000 square feet in total floor area. That would be on all floors. That's not a number that's going to make sense in the concept that we've seen presented to us. So we're going to look back to the developer and try to understand better what kind of a standard would make sense there. We also then on page 3 of the ordinance have a series of architectural design standards. They are what you have seen previously, except to the extent that when we spent some time talking about whether brick was the right kind of a treatment, suggestions were that field stone or other river stone or some other types of stone might be more desirable than brick, and that those alternatives should be called out in the ordinance. We've referred to hardy plank as a type of clapboard. I'm not sure, since that's a brand name, that that's the best way to make that reference, but we're talking about allowing a mixture of stone materials and clapboard type siding that hopefully will be very interesting because of those variations. On page 4, we've identified what would be the standards that would apply to the mixed use portion of the site, which will be a lot somewhere in the vicinity of 7 acres, and we need some final confirmation on that area. But on that 7 acres, we would be permitting those uses I described previously that contribute to the mixed use character here. And we have accessory building standards which permit a close proximity to the road right of way. Here, we're thinking of that accessory, whether it's a retail element or whatever small scale building might be out closer to the street. We're trying to engage the streetscape more in the development rather than just having a fairly broad setback. Whether 15 feet is the right number there or some other number, we have to look closer at the design concept to tell you that. But what we're really trying to do is set a set of reasonable standards for the mixed use portion, and then create a set of standards that will still work for the office development, which KRE hopes to keep and enhance, and which we hope they keep and enhance. So those are standards that we've had a little help from the proponent of the zone change to understand what it takes to do that. And we're still in the process of refining those numbers. So I wouldn't get too hung up on any of them, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about what's been suggested or why it's been suggested. I'll stop there for a minute in case anybody has any questions.
Frank, I noticed minimum number of affordable family rental units is pegged at 33.
Yes. We need to talk about that a little bit. That's one of the things that I think is going to be an important thing for the board to consider. I always try not to find myself juxtaposed with the mayor's opinion, because he wins in every one of these arguments in the long run, as well he should. I've suggested that if we have an opportunity to get a leg up on the 4th round, that instead of just the 23 units that we need to complete our 28 unit rezoning obligation by next year, that if we got 33 units with a better than 15% set aside, we could still stay in the same scale as the development was anticipated to be, and have 10 of what are likely to be 20 or more family, despite the fact that we have 700 extra affordable units based on the hills. And it's hard to even say this. The rules also provide that we've had this other need that we hadn't met, the family rentals. We will have that again in the 4th round. The suggestion here is that if we knock off 10 of those now, instead of looking for a 150 or 200 unit project in 2025, we might have 10 or 15 units, and it scales the project size down. The competing opinion there about that is we've done way more than our fair share. And if we have to do 23 more units, then let's do 23 more units and leave it at that. And that's really for the board to discuss and to, determine. That's probably a good place to hand it off to the board to talk about it.
I'll open it up to the board. Anybody have any comments?
So it's Mayor Jacobs. So I would just like to sort of take a step back and remember why we're here. And we talked about this at the end of the last meeting. And the current obligation under the settlement agreement with Fair Share Housing is that Bedminster must, by June 30, 2021, have constructed or have zoned for 28 family rental affordable units. 5 of those units will be satisfied by the Elite Properties project up on Lamington Road, which would leave Bedminster with a deficit of 23 family rental affordable units to have zoned for by June 30, 2021. Frank, I hear you loud and clear that it sure would be nice to put additional units in, but with additional units, if we're doing inclusionary housing, comes additional market rate units. And I think that's something that the board and then eventually the township committee need to, really dig into, and, using the normal equations to get to 23 units, you're looking at about 152, 153 total units. That's a big project for a town like us, and we haven't certainly seen anything of that scale since the Hills being constructed in the 80s. So this is a big old step. I understand that in scale and in traffic and in other impacts, the difference between 150 and 160 may not be that much, 160 to 170 may not be that much, and in between 170 and 180 may not be that much. But, I just want to remind everyone that the reason we're looking at the zoning change for this particular property is primarily as a means to accommodate the obligation we have under the settlement agreement with Fair Share Housing. Certainly, Bedminster is not in a race to density. We're not in a race to put additional units in town just for the sake of it. This property works for a couple different reasons. Where it's situated in town, it has no neighbors, and it presents itself well, and also certainly supports the improvements that we've long talked about for Pluckman Village and some of the commercial space around there, including the Bed One office property itself. But I do just want to tap the brakes on Frank's approach to go for additional units. I think that's something we just need to consider a little bit more. So Frank, I hear you loud and clear, but I think looking at that as a minimum number of affordable rental units.
I don't have a vote, Mayor. And I think board members clearly understand the question that's been raised, and I appreciate and respect your opinion about that. So I'm not here to argue it with you.
All right, well, but I'm just saying you put it out there as a starting point, and it's up to us, and maybe in this meeting and maybe in subsequent meetings, to figure out a number that that the board feels comfortable with, and to certainly put that number back into perspective with the number above it, with the maximum total number of residential units. So to some extent, they go hand in hand, and I think that's really going to be a big focus of what we discussed tonight.
I think it's probably the biggest focus. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, I agree. Anyone else from the board have any comments for what Frank has talked about, or the mayor?
Rich has his hand raised.
I did it in the protocol manner, by the way.
Thank you.
So to the point about whether we reach for more than the 15% or, as a function of what number we ultimately end up with, whether it's 33 or 20% or thereabout in total capacity. I'm not sure this is a consideration for us with respect to this particular application, but it seems to me if we can get to whatever our fourth round obligations are and become, if we can get there by building 800 new apartments rather than 1,000 new apartments, we want to try to do that if we can, because to get to our numbers, we're going to have to build that much more apartments overall, or sell that many more affordable units in some way, shape, or form. And I just think if we can get there faster, and maybe that's not the right word, but if we can get there faster by having less of an impact on the our community overall, and less of a potentially what some people will perceive as an adverse impact on the master plan even, I think we should try to go for it. In this particular application, our friends at, and this is maybe irrelevant, but in this particular application, our friends at KRE don't have acquisition costs associated with this property. This is a repositioning, so to speak, of the property. Unlike Elite, which acquired the property perhaps with some pro forma modeling about how many units they needed to get there to make this thing even worthwhile. But in this particular situation, they don't have the same acquisition costs and development costs as somebody else might have. So maybe on this application, we can push it a little bit more than we would on another one without creating a hardship for the developer. My 2 cents. That said, I sent to all of you, and I did that erroneously, I'm sorry, Tom, some comments on Frank's draft today. So my questions about dining and gathering spaces are accommodated as permitted uses already. That's fine.
I think they are, Rich. Let's go over that a little bit with Frank and Paul. This zone draft says that in that mixed use area, all the principal permitted uses of the VN district are permitted. And then the VN does allow restaurants, and it's
Right.
I think, but you know, we could be redundant, but I think that the VN district allows outdoor dining provided as outdoor activities are approved, provided they're approved by a site plan by the board. But is that sort of your understanding too, Paul and Frank, that if you are complying with the VN district, you can have outdoor dining if it's a part of your site plan? I feel like that we've done that.
Right.
But
Yes, that's my understanding.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything in that zone that prohibits outdoor dining.
All right, well, how about if you wanted to do outdoor spaces and you had like a little, a band or a kind of amphitheater kind of thing that they were suggesting in one of the alternatives there.
I think parks are also permitted uses.
yeah, I
Public
think
playground, public playgrounds, parks, recreation areas, public purpose uses.
I think what it would be, I mean, we could be redundant though, but I think basically if a site plan includes a lot of things outdoors, even by the way, some outdoor displays, and it's approved by the board, then that is permitted. Then that becomes the approval that allows the outdoor activities, outdoor dining, some displays. But if you want to be redundant, we could put something specific, I think, at the end of accessory uses. So let me think about it a little bit more.
Leave it to you guys
Rich,
to decide if it's necessary. I just raised the
Right.
question. All right.
But you had other points too, Rich.
Yeah,
I
just a quick question, guys. Are you all, is it just me or does Tom have a technological stutter?
Oh,
Just
I hope
you.
not.
Just you.
Just me, okay, because
I'll speak more clearly.
he comes through staccato on my side. All right, so the next thing that I was questioning is the 55-foot height. Frank suggested that it was reasonable, but if we flip through the plan, I guess you all have that at this point, right? The latest major architects piece, right?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
we all got that.
All right, so I'm looking
What was
at
the
this-
date
I'm
on
looking
that,
at this
Rich?
section. I'm looking at this section that shows a 15-foot floor-to-floor dimension on the first level, almost an 11-foot floor-to-floor dimension on the next 2 levels, and because of the residential nature and a pitched roof, you got another 13 feet on top of the on top of the 3rd floor. So that gets you to the 55 feet pretty easily. personally, I'd rather see it closer to 50 than 55 because, that's 10 feet higher than anything else in town. And if there's a way to make the 15-foot floor-to-floor dimension, 13 feet and the 11-foot floor-to-floor dimension, more like 10 or 10 and a half, then the pitch comes down besides, and we're back around 50 instead of 45. And I think, 55 feet just seems awful high to me.
Rich, I just want to weigh in for 1 second. And I mentioned this briefly at the last meeting, is that there is a 55-foot limit for the corporate suite development option that frankly, the application was just delivered yesterday in town. So 55 feet is a use that is permitted really in this end of the town.
So for the Alfieri project around the corner there, basically?
Correct. That has a 55-foot limit.
We already permitted 55?
Yes.
And Paul, is that what they're proposing?
I haven't unfolded the plans to check yet, but I have to guess they're going to be pretty close to that.
I just feel like, I understand that there's a precedent, Paul, but I just feel like we belabored scale and massing so much on the Elite project that it's a real sensitivity for a lot of people. And, 5 feet may not seem like much, but it's a 10% reduction to bring it from 55 to 50. And, with some of the other issues that I have about air and light with this project, it'll make it seem that much more, maybe delicate is the word I'm looking for.
And to be clear, I'm not advocating for the 55 feet. I just wanted to make it clear that
I appreciate
that does
it.
exist in the
I didn't
site.
know that we had approved. I didn't recall that we had approved 55 feet ever before. So there is a precedent for it. I appreciate that.
Hey, Rich, my comments, I was going to hold until after we've run through yours, but it sort of dovetails with this. And I know that there are other jurisdictions that have imposed setbacks for the second, third, and potentially fourth floors of buildings, right? And I'm not sure how we would write that in, but one of the things we talked about when we talked about the massing, particularly of this building, is that the setbacks between the residential units and the retail spaces on the first floor made a big difference in how you perceive the building. Right. And so maybe we can address some of that perceived 5-foot difference by regulating the setback on the street frontage. Right. That anything over 1 story needs to be pushed back an additional 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 feet, whatever that number is.
So if I'm reading, but if I'm, to your point, I think it's a good point, Anna, that it would make me feel better if we weren't going up 55 feet from the sidewalk, right?
Right. Or even even if the building is set back 50 or 100 feet, if it's a straight wall that's all in one dimension, it looks a lot different than if the second and third floors are pushed back a little bit, right? And there's some
that same section, though, that was provided, and there's a roof line that goes up to 55 feet, and I'm not sure where this section was taken. There's a roof line that goes up to 55 feet right at the extent of the balcony. Now, it may not be it may not be the structure that's closest to the street where this section was drawn, but right at that same balcony level, except for the some portions of the building are set back, some of them come right up front. There's a little play in that plane, but it looks like there's some going up 55 feet right from the edge of some of the structures.
Right. And so to Frank, I don't know how we would draft that to address that, maybe it's 60% of the building needs to have a setback beyond the first floor footprint or something along those lines. So we make sure I am confident and comfortable that KRE's execution of this is in line with sort of what we've been talking about. But my concern is that we're drafting ordinances that are going to outlive
Somebody's going to come
potentially
along.
this project.
Somebody's going to come along with the project and say you did 55 feet down the street, and I want to do mine at 55 feet, and that's right up to the curb.
Right, and it's right up to the curb, and it's in a vertical plane, and there's no differentiation in sightlines.
And the one way to accomplish what you're suggesting is that you'd have a setback from the road for the third floor, so that between the road and where that setback happens, you'd have the 1-story retail. You could have 2 stories of residential, and frequently when that's done, those are balconies on the roof for the units that are on the 3rd floor behind them. So if you step it back like that, it might solve the issue that Rich is bringing up.
And I think it's the way, originally the zoning in New York City actually worked, right? When they birthday caked the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building, et cetera, it doesn't go up, 100 stories from Fifth Avenue. It maybe only goes up 40 stories from Fifth Avenue, and then there's a setback, and there's another setback.
I think it's only like 6 stories.
Chicago too does that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's the first zoning in New York City has the layer cake design drawn in the zoning ordinance. It's amazing. A picture.
So, so maybe we could do that. So maybe it's a maximum of 30 feet at the frontage and 45 feet at the second step, and then 55 feet at a third step. That would be that much setback. I guess
certainly a reasonable way to approach
55
this.
feet if we did that, but overall, I was just concerned about the massing and the scale that, again, I felt like we belabored on the last application.
Now, it'd be good to listen to Mark Kushner about this too, but also
I'd like to make,
I just would like to, let me just say one further thing, and that is we're going to attach pictures, and the pictures are going to be, we're just beginning to know what they look like, but at least 2 initial drafts are attached so far, but we could attach more, and those might be something about the facade deviations along facades that are visible from public view. So just an idea, but I noticed that the very same elevation graphic that you're looking at, Rich, has the 10-foot setback on the second story for the retail, and maybe that could be a picture that's a requirement as well. And we're trying to say, Frank didn't get into the detail, but we're trying to say that the attached or included designs and elevations shall be substantially complied with by the applicant, and deviations will have to be approved by the board. So just think about the benefit of having some designs included in an ordinance, and sometimes those help with saving 1,000 words.
Lou, you wanted to,
no, I just wanted to echo, Rich and Anna's point. This project, we're pretty much working with KRE on it, and I actually really applaud them for their creativity. But this particular project, I think if I remember, is 500 feet long from one side to the other. And anything that we can do to decrease the perception of the massiveness of this project and building would be helpful. So the suggestions that Anna made, the suggestions that Rich made, if we can trim 2 or 3 feet off the height, or 2 or 3, 20 or 30 feet off the length, anywhere, if KRE can do that, I think it would be beneficial for everyone.
I remember Jeff also mentioned about breaking up the actual residential buildings. Elaborate on that, Jeff?
Yeah, I know, absolutely. And I think this goes back to our first meeting with this, one of the slides that Frank shared with us at the time, showing an example of a lot of different not just stepping back of the building, but different architectural styles, just to break up the monolith of these buildings, which is a comment I think I made last time we talked about it 2 weeks ago, I guess it was. And I think that would really help also, not just the mass of the building, but, how it's perceived. If it's, maybe like a bunch of smaller buildings assembled together, even though it may be a single building. So I think that would be one other way to achieve that as well.
Does anybody have the height of the residential that's in the front? I mean, the retail that's in the front of it? I don't have it in front of me. Do you know that off top, Frank?
I don't, Carol, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all right.
Does anybody have that they can share maybe of the latest and greatest? I mean, other than the 1029, which is what was sent to us most recently. Is anything newer?
Is there
Maybe-
anything newer?
Maybe Mark can share it. I don't know.
It looks like it's 12 feet for the retail height.
Thanks, Rich. Yeah.
You see that?
There you go. Yep, good job.
So I'm concerned here, right? So this is the piece I guess this is the retail component here where my cursor is going. If this is the retail component that's closest to Burnt Mills Road, that might be only 48 or 50 feet at that height, which maybe I'm okay with. I'm concerned with the height here, which is right at the line of the balcony, is fully 55 feet. And I think what we saw in the elevations was a mix of the brick and the washed brick or the acid washed brick and the hardy board, and they had vertical hardy board, and they had standard kind of shiplap kind of details on other portions of it. And then we were talking about some kind of cut stone or ashlar stone that, all gives us the sense that, breaking up that massing that I think we're all a little bit concerned about as well. So I'm comfortable with the exterior treatments. I'm comfortable with the fact that we have balconies and certain amount of setback, but I think we need to go a little bit further with the step back to kind of bring this corner back to at least here. Is that what you were thinking, Jeff?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think just, not even just in one place, Rich, but, along the building, just to sort of break up the, maybe, the elevation, in elevation does, different projections. Maybe it goes deeper, from one unit to the next type of a thing, so that it's, in 3D, it's doing different things. You follow what I'm saying?
Yep.
Kind of hard to see it.
These elements give depth, though. I mean, that's the gable end. I mean, where it's that high is only in one section. You're looking at it, that's the peak.
Right. Well, it's hard to use it.
You start chopping this up and moving it all back. I mean, this is going to be far from the street. This isn't going to be right on the street. You're going to have a sidewalk. We're going to have a parking lot, and then you're going to have a larger area. This is going to be a little farther back.
I think
Hey, I agree with you. If this was in a different place, that height would be.
I think this is the bollard, Tim. This is the bollard separating the vehicular traffic from the pedestrian traffic. So that looks like it's every bit of 30 feet from the street vehicular traffic and the building itself.
But that's not the street, that's a parking lot.
Right. But again, this is where the pedestrians are here, not out here.
Yeah.
We're going to have just like a little buffer strip between this parking lot and I don't even know where the curb is, based on this section, but.
I think, Rich, we're hoping to activate that area with more than just a sidewalk on the other side of the parking lot. And that's the pavilion and potential retail kiosks out there are the things we're hoping will help us make it feel more like a pedestrian.
For me, you solve the whole thing by dropping it 5 feet. I can appreciate Anna's perspective here that, if it was 55 feet and it's not 55 feet right from the edge of the building, makes me a little bit more comfortable, but I think there's a pretty simple way of bringing this down to 50 feet without too much trouble.
Well, we can ask them, but.
Well, certainly if there was a flat roof, it would be below, you'd be down where you want it to be, but is that the kind of concept that we have in mind here?
Well, and I think the height is going to be in direct proportion to how far back we get to push this from the road, right? There's a big difference between 55 feet at 15 feet off the property line or at 100 feet off the property line, right? So if we're crafting this to address the setbacks for this particular development, we can push it as far back as we need to get comfortable with what it's going to look like on the streetscape.
Yeah. Can we look at it from the front again? Just, you know, we're looking, you're at the street. I think that's what people are kind of sensitive with right now. And I agree. It's like, what's it going to look like? And at what points are the 50, you know, where are the high points visually when you're standing at the street?
I think I have all those here in this package. This is just the.
Oh, you're doing.
This is the abridged package. Right.
Rich and Tom and Carol, if it would be easier, we can certainly bring those drawings up on the screen and share our screen from either Mark or my computer.
Yeah, no, I think you have the better piece. The only thing that I wanted to show about one of the versions that I had here, and we'll skip through the end. I'm going to stop this share and allow you to do that, Noah, if you can.
Yeah, so I'll let Mark drive here, but while Mark is bringing that up, just a couple things on what we're talking about here. I think that section, and Mark will discuss it, is a little bit misleading. Actually, I don't think that any part of the building that would be 55 feet high comes out that far. In fact, I believe that and I'll let Mark talk to it, that the roof line that gets to that height is set back 10 feet from the first floor all along the facade of the building. The second thing, and I'll just get into it just a little bit on the heights. So our standard 3-story residential building that is slab on grade with no retail in it is about 47.5 feet high. The reason why it's 47.5 feet high is because that gets you to a roof pitch of 5-foot fall for every 12 feet in length of the roof over a 70-foot wide double loaded corridor, which is the ideal sort of pitch for a roof to drain properly, prevent ice melt, and not have too much pressure on the roof system. The flatter you go.
What'd you say, Noah? 5 and 12?
5 and 12. Yep. So you could make, I think, Rich, we could talk about going a little bit. I think that we can push that slope down a little bit. I don't think it will get a 5-foot reduction in the height.
Well, how about the floor heights though? Do we need 12 feet?
Yeah, so the floor heights, I think what's driving this here is the retail. I think a 12-foot floor to ceiling retail height is a pretty typical retail height, if not a little low. Our residential floors are 9.1 1/4 always, from floor to ceiling, and our truss systems are just about 16, just about 18 inches. Our truss systems are. So that's where you get to the 10.8 plus or minus. It's a little bit less than 18 inches, the truss systems, but pretty much our floor to floor heights are 10.8 in almost all of our residential buildings. So that's where you're getting the 10.8 from.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I do think, we can talk a little bit about how far the building is from the street. The one setback above the retail, I think, is going to be pretty effective in pushing the building back. With a building this short, a second step back at the 3rd floor is going to be a real bear. These units stack, as you can imagine, and I don't think it's going to accomplish much more in terms of the visuals. It will make the project significantly more expensive and the 3rd floor units more difficult to rent, because we won't pick up that square footage anywhere in those units. So we would pretty strongly advocate for the one single setback, and then the 2nd and 3rd floors stacking straight down.
But again, I think they'll be far back from the street, and with the setback and the landscaping proposed on the parapet above the retail, I think they should recede quite a bit, as sort of some of what Anna was talking about there. But I think we can make an effort, Rich, as you said, to soften that slope a little bit and try to get ourselves a couple feet on the slope of the roof.
Yeah, and then the height there at the gable end is driven by that span. And what did you say that was, 70 feet?
So our standard double loaded corridor is about 70 feet. Yep.
Yeah.
But I think that view is a little deceiving. So if we just click over to here, you're just looking at that one moment and that one moment there, and that's about, I think, about 40 feet. But what we tried to do with the facade is to layer it down and down and down, so that when it comes down, and I thought the New York analogy was actually perfect, the sky plane analogy. It's exactly what we tried to do, just bring it further and further down to a pedestrian scale as we come down to the plaza. And then the plaza, the building is about 106 feet away from the curb of Burnt Mills. So you've really got a chance to sort of build up. You've got the one-story building that's in front of this landscape, smaller one-story and two-story buildings, and then it builds up to this. And then this roof line is a further 10 feet back. So I'm not saying it's not a tall, but it's sort of, sensitively placed so that it's not a jarring juxtaposition, and it's not right on the road, and it doesn't sort of dominate the site the way that just a plunk.
So Mark, so this is good that we're looking at the elevation, because it looks like the only spot where the 55 feet comes out to the building line is at that gable end, three-quarters of the way from the left to all the way to the right.
Right.
That's the one gable end that goes up 55 feet.
That's the one. And I mean, that was my flourish. If you don't like it, I can reconsider it. But I thought it'd be great to sort of have some verticality rather than this relentless horizontality.
Yeah, I think so too.
I like it.
In elevation, it looks fine. The concern, as Anna was pointing out, is that, we agree to 55 feet, and some knucklehead's going to want to have the whole building be 55 feet.
I know, it's always the bad architects that wreck it for the good ones, but a good zoning attorney can work that out, I'm sure.
This does not create a precedent for somebody to get a variance. And one of the things that frustrates the crap out of me, excuse my French, as a frustrated architect who never got a practicing degree, is when everybody wants to push the roof down flatter and the building becomes undistinguished. Roof height on a gable roof has a lot to do with the presence of the building. So I'd like to see a little bit more of what the difference might look like, because I'd be surprised if we didn't like it better the way it looks now than with a flatter roof.
Yeah. Go back to the elevation, Mark.
Sure.
Completely.
And I think
I'm completely comfortable with it in elevation, I guess. It was just that section that was making me.
I just texted Noah. It's not a good drawing, and I'm happy to produce a better section. And it's probably better to see this building in multiple sections because it's sort of conceived of as several sections.
So if you go left to right, the height of the dormer looks like it's well under 50 feet from left to right, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the most forward gable at the first, I don't know what you got there. I think there's some kind of clapboard on the side on that first projection, and then there's brick on the.
Right. Here, let me just flip to. I think I've got a. Yeah, you can kind of see it here. The idea is like a shed roof.
Mm-hmm.
The gable steps down, change material, and then we've got this wood gable here. And this is, I think this is 36 feet. Let's just get that line. 36 feet 4 inches.
At the eave?
Sorry.
At the eave?
Yeah, exactly at where the gable starts.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I love it in elevation, frankly.
I'm not going to say anything actually.
Mark, can I ask one question? Because we had a question from Jeff before about whether this could be individuated into smaller pieces as opposed to the two sort of massive pieces and the break in the middle. I don't know if you looked at any alternatives like that. You know,
Um,
I'm not trying to suggest a peddler's village look where a bunch of little cobbled together store, you know. But I don't know if that's it seems as though the iterative scale in town is so small, and this is graceful but large. And the question is, would there be any way to try to bridge the gap? I think that was what Jeff was asking.
That's pretty much it. Yeah, I agree, Frank.
Yeah, Jeff, it's good. I mean, it's exactly the question we asked when we approached this. So roughly, and I can show you in plan, roughly the two houses across the street, I know they're not houses now, they're retail, but they're roughly this scale. And what we tried to do was sort of respond and pick up on the scale of the existing architecture and sort of break it up into those scales. But then my feeling was that if we just kept doing it, we'd be building like an ersatz Disney kind of, you know, colonialville. So at some point we just sort of decided, let's let it go. Now this right-hand side is longer than the left-hand side. So we thought it was important to break it up, and that could be a great entrance for the gym program that goes there. But that was my, like, we tried to address the same thing, but we thought breaking it up further might just make it too ticky-tacky. And we were pretty pleased with the composition. One thing that we did hear in the last conversation was the materiality of the central lobby amenity space. So we tried a bunch of different versions, and whoever suggested Fieldstone, we really liked it, and that's kind of where we ended up, changing the materiality to go to like a local Fieldstone, and we thought that softened the whole thing. And we actually just looked at the wells that are in Pluckerman Village and would want to get as close as possible to that kind of masonry.
Looks great.
That's nice.
Yeah, it does look very good.
Now, this could be a little awkward because the next 5 slides, we spent a couple weeks exploring a sort of horse equine themed mixed use project with some off-track betting.
Todd.
But given the previous conversation, this might not be the time, Mark, to show that.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the solution.
Show me.
We knew the conversation actually tonight, just to get back to being serious, that the conversation tonight was going to be around zoning, but we did do a little bit of work, not only on a material study, which I think we agree with you guys, and I think it was Anna's comment from before about maybe Fieldstone. I think Rich had a comment also, Riverstone. We thought that looked lovely, but we also did want to go back. We realized this is somewhat of a site planning conversation, but we did do another look to respond to Rich and others' comments about the front yards being over landscaped. And not providing some visibility into the project. And also, I think that Tim had made a comment, and I apologize if it wasn't Tim, but actually I can probably find who it was.
Yeah, it was me.
Yeah, it was Tim on the angled parking, as my notes show. So we tried to realign some of the parking here. And again, we realize this is somewhat of a site planning conversation, but wanted to make our best efforts here in this stage to show what a relook at that might be. And I think it provided a lot more breathability into the site from the street.
Yeah.
And I think the more dead on the parking and circulation schemes working better here too.
Yeah.
It doesn't become a one-way street, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think it definitely looks better.
Yeah.
And it functions better. Yes.
Yeah.
I like that.
Did you lose any parking?
Sorry?
Did you lose any parking when you changed the configuration?
We didn't. We had to squeeze the stalls are a little bit bigger when you park straight on instead of diagonally, but we kind of squeezed it back towards the building, but there's still plenty of room for cafe seating in the plaza.
Are they 9 foot by 18 foot parking stalls?
I believe so.
Okay.
Improved.
Yeah.
You know, angle parking there are always a lot of problems that come with it. So I think this works a lot better.
Yeah. Especially since we have 2 drive entrances here. It wasn't as well thought out as it needed.
Well,
to be.
it limits the people's abilities you have to be going in one direction to get to a certain number of spaces, you know.
Frank, I want to go back to something though. In the architectural design standards of the draft, we get pretty detailed in here. And I think on the elevation, Mark, can I prompt you?
Sure, yeah.
I think on the elevation, there's plenty of interplay between the massing and lights. There's low scale components, especially as you separate the first structure from the retail component or the convocation center in the middle, and then the second structure, et cetera. So there's some light there, but I'm still troubled with the plan and what happens beyond the stage front. And that and maybe that'll become a function of how many units we ultimately are comfortable with. But I think there's plenty of opportunity in the plan to break up those structures a little bit. I mentioned it the last time, and I think I included here, I want to just, if I can pull this up, just show you what I had in mind here. And can you guys see that?
I'll stop sharing.
Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay, so what I'm kind of suggesting back here, instead of these, this U shape, which is pretty big footprint, and then this little J here is another pretty big footprint. If we broke it up into multiple structures some way by creating maybe a little alley between two structures here, and creating some green space between two structures here. The light and air at the rear of the site kind of matches what you've done very successfully at the front of the site. And we get down, I don't know how many units this takes out, but if it took out 10 or 15 units and we got down to 175 or so, or 170 or so, I might be a little bit more comfortable with the project in general. So I don't know if that's something you can contemplate, but maybe there's some efficiencies in terms of, roofing and construction costs, et cetera, by not having multiple buildings. But, maybe this is done with just alleyways and, a little break in the roof line. I don't know, but that's kind of what I was suggesting here and here.
Sorry, Noah, were you going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, Rich, I think that probably breaks or changes in the roof line would be the way that we would be most amenable to trying to achieve that, Rich. Breaking the building itself is not an insignificant cost. In fact, it's a pretty expensive one, because every time if we were to break a building like that, and it would be 3 stories, we'd be required to have another staircase. All the exterior materials would go there. So I think that working with the roof lines on the back part of the building, again, this won't be public facing, but we understand the comment, I think could be a way that we could try to achieve some of that. Breaking through the buildings, I think would be a really heavy lift in this scheme. And I think that the center of the center mass, I personally feel like
there's light and air here. This becomes just a big parking field. There's light and air here, but I think if you're standing here, this looks like it's like 400 feet worth of, edifice.
Yeah, I think it needs to be, it's not fully designed yet. And the idea would be to give it the same kind of treatment we've given to the front of the building, maybe not quite as articulated, but, for me, there's an opportunity. This will serve as the main parking entrance to the building. That would be a chance to kind of do what we did over here with that gable that we brought out and break that mass. And we can even draw that in here. And then I think the corner could be another moment where we can sort of break the mass. So if we have a reveal, it might feel like 2 separate buildings. And then, like Noah said at the last meeting, we're interested in pursuing some idea of townhouses or masonettes that might have entrances or stoop entries right off of the parking garage. So I think, and like this square is actually only about 120 feet wide. So it'll feel nice. I think it'll feel like a residential scale. But it's incumbent upon us to articulate that nicely and not have it feel like a big slab of a building.
Okay. All right. Well, that was my point there. I'm going to give up the share. And last but not least, on the drafts, Frank, we incorporated the notions of connectivity, I think, between the site and the office building, et cetera. And we've had a lot of lip service about this being walkable and pedestrian and accessible to the neighboring and adjacent retail centers. Is it not appropriate to incorporate walkways and and accessibility into the ordinance itself in terms of pedestrian circulation and access to those adjacent retail areas?
No, actually, Rich, I think it's entirely appropriate to think about that. The part that's going to connect over to the office building is an internal improvement that I'm sure they're thinking about already. The exterior or the external circulation is really going to be the sidewalks and the crosswalks. We're in the middle of a village that's got sidewalks. I think we want to make sure we have complete connections like that and improved intersection, as we've talked about. But I don't think that we're trying to do anything beyond what would be typical for that kind of sidewalk system.
So the final site plan will actually include the sidewalks and the juxtaposition of the adjacent sites. So we obviously have the corner at 202, 206 and Burnt Mills Road, but we also have, the opportunity for a crossing right pretty much where the old Burger King is, right?
Well, there's a mid-block crossing is always an issue if there's no signalized control or other limits on how, in that kind of a traffic situation. I won't rule that out at all. In fact, I think we really need Chuck Olivo to be talking with us about that stuff more than me.
I guess when we get to the actual site planning, but you saw my comments about where we might insert something about walkways and accessibility, but where the best place to put that in is.
Well, it was a good comment. I think we'll figure out a way to enhance the walkability through some of the suggestions you made.
And overall, I think we're tracking appropriately. I might like to see it a little bit smaller. That's my last comment.
That was your first comment too.
Oh, did I say that already?
Noah, one of the things that I always consider when we do these projects is where you might put your snow when you have a major snowstorm.
Yeah, that's a good question, because we certainly have done site plans in the past where we have overlooked that, Carol, frankly, and have had to then carve out space afterward. We've not gotten that far in this planning and would anticipate that certainly to be part of the site plan. And I think that what we would be doing would be trying to coordinate as best as possible between the two properties. But I think we will find a home for snow removal in some of the parking area, likely near a trash area, but we've not gotten that far in the planning. You can rest assured that it is part of our site planning checklist. After a few years ago, I missed one at a Willow Grove project in Pennsylvania, and we had to go back and do it. So it's on our radar screen, and during the site plan process, we'll certainly find a home for it.
Okay, yeah, I want you to keep that in mind.
Absolutely.
Another, do you plan to have pets in these apartments?
Yeah, we allow pets in our apartments.
You do?
And we always have a dog area, dog run on site so that it doesn't become a burden. But we certainly do allow pets in the apartments. We don't allow smoking, but we do allow pets.
Interesting. I had a meeting the other night and it lasted an hour. 45 minutes was on pets. Have you used or considered FIDO stations for that? I don't know. I mean, I don't know if we're at that point yet, but I'm just bringing it up again for consideration. These pet stations do help because that is a major problem.
Yeah, certainly. And we're open to anything, any suggestions that you have, Carol. Again, we will have an on-site dog run. Always has, little doggy bags. We put in many of our developments now, we will carve out a small space for a pet washing station. We always plumb our dog wash areas so that we can wash them down with a hose. So we keep them clean, we keep them nice, and certainly provide area for the pet owners. But again, during the site plan process, very open to ideas that you all have and to learn from your experience as well.
Right. Okay. Anybody else on the board?
Carol, I mentioned last time about thinking about how we better activate the front space. And I guess the question for Mark and Noah is, if you remove the constraints, what would you suggest to go from good to great? What could possibly be done, just if you greenfield it, to provide more frontage for casual dining, public access, et cetera? Is there anything in mind? I guess my question is, I still look at a parking lot fronting 500 feet of building. Is there anything we could do to break that up and to better provide and activate that space?
Well, so one, I think the pavilion, it was a pretty successful move in that direction. I also think that Mark and his team have done a pretty good job, and I think this is going to be actually very critical with the new stormwater regulations. We were talking about this with Ron Kennedy earlier today. Did a pretty good job breaking that parking field with landscaped moments throughout the parking field. And in fact, I think that we're going to be needing to use those with the new stormwater regulations to help treat runoff and water quality. So we're seeing those green areas as pretty important, not just in breaking up the parking, but in managing the stormwater. And lastly, I think that the differentiated paving is going to make a big difference. I think these guys found some great precedents that really enliven, so it doesn't just look like blacktop. And that's not what we plan to do here. And so I think that those elements are good. I mean, frankly, I don't think if all the constraints were loosened, I don't think we would try to pull this building any closer to the street. I don't think we'd try to put too much more in front of it because it's presenting really nicely from the street here. And that retail pavilion is going to give you one step before you get to the scale 110 feet away. I really don't see loosening the constraints being anything that we would take advantage of right now. I think that we're feeling really good about how this is laying out and about how these guys have treated that front area there, in particular the parking, which can be unattractive. And I think there's been some good solutions here.
Thank you.
Any other board members?
I have a question for the planner, Mr. Banish. Frank, can you tell me if there's how other towns go about satisfying these COA requirements without a big development? Just to put that aside a second. Are smaller lots ever zoned for what developers would need to build a building with an affordable unit? Are existing buildings ever designated as affordable units? I was looking at Far Hills. It seems like they have some smaller buildings. I just wondered if you could talk about that or enlighten us.
I'm happy to, George. Yeah, the principal alternative to inclusionary development is 100% affordable development, which means that we would have essentially worked with a nonprofit or a affordable housing developer to find a site, create the opportunity for these 28 units, and then find out whether or not that would qualify for
tax credit financing. The biggest thing about doing the alternative to inclusionary development, where you get rid of the multiplier, you just build the units that you owe, so to speak, is that the HMFA program has essentially benchmarked a size of project that they prefer. And that size tends to be in the somewhere between 60 and 75 units that will be eligible to get the full score on the scoring process that they do and qualify for the tax credit funding. The problem with the 100% projects is that you will be required, according to the COA regulations, and if it were an amendment to the agreement with Fair Share, the town will be required to backstop any shortfall in funding that may occur. And they usually give you 2 whacks at the HMFA apple to try to get the funding. And after that, you're on the hook to pay for it yourself, the municipality, I mean. So it is a way to do a lot less development, for sure. It can be done on a much smaller lot, as you suggested, George, obviously. 28 units might only need 2 or 3 acres, maybe 4 acres, something like that.
But my other question, Frank, is, and I don't know, I'm just asking, do towns ever zone smaller lots where you might get one affordable unit on one lot with a couple other apartments, like a 3 or 4 family home, and one of the units isn't affordable? Or
Yes.
four units in one building?
Typically, it's done in these overlay zones that towns use to meet some portion of their affordable housing obligation. Because we're meeting our entire obligation, we don't need to have any of those overlay zones, but you could create zoning opportunities like the ones you're describing.
Well, right, my question to you is, Frank, how many of those lots would we need to rezone to satisfy the zoning requirements?
When you're in a town like, let's say Milburn, where I'm the court master, and the whole Main Street is basically a 1-story kind of place almost. There's lots of room in the upper 2 or 3 floors that you might allow somebody to add to put exactly the kind of units you're talking about, George. Part of our problem is in this revolutionary village that we have here. You know what the size of the buildings are. I mean, there may be an apartment upstairs, but there certainly isn't room for 3 or 4 or 5, generally speaking.
Right, so my question to you is, can you zone for that?
Yes, you can.
So you could zone for that, and if somebody wanted to build them, you could allow them to do it, and those units would satisfy.
They would count.
Okay.
Again, just trying to find a way that we would give people the opportunity to build 5 or 6 units in order to get one in the housing stock or the building stock that we have in the village. It's just hard to imagine, without tearing buildings down and starting over, how that would become a really effective way to get housing.
And are there ever any situations where it might be like a 3-family home and you get one affordable unit?
Yeah, the ratio typically is the 15 or 20% that we've heard about. So you're not going to get 1 for 1 or 1 for 3. You're going to get 1 for 5 or 1 for 6.
So why when I'm just going to use Far Hills as an example, because they have I think two buildings on one lot, and there's 5, I think, like maybe 3 or 4 affordable units in each building.
I'm embarrassed to say that because my brother is the planner at Far Hills and I haven't been there for a while. I'm not familiar with what you're talking about, but I've seen it other places. I know it happens.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find out about it, just to see if it's something we should look at, or at least say we did look at it.
George, if you're talking about those couple on Peapack Road, those are group homes done with Matheny. So it's a completely different type of unit.
Gotcha. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you.
And just, I mean, I think a lot of folks on this call do know what's going on in Far Hills, but there's a very large project that is being proposed to satisfy affordable housing obligations. It is not a, 3 or 4 unit project. It is.
It's 200, I think, 200.
You think it's 200?
I think it is. I don't know the exact number, but it's in that number.
Yeah, no, it's created quite a stir in Far
Yeah, it
Hills.
has. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else from the board? I guess I'll open it up to the public and ask them if they have any questions.
Well, does Carrie have an additional presentation?
Oh, they might. That's very true. I'll open it up to Noah.
No, really what we wanted to show tonight was just the relook at the planning effort, and certainly the difference in using the field stone versus the brick. But we understood that tonight's conversation was much more about the zoning. So that's where we focused our efforts in the lead up to this, as well as like what you saw from Mark, the replanning of the plaza and the use of the field stone versus the brick. I would like to say one more thing, Madam Chairwoman, and that is just to address something that Rich brought up about there not being a land cost here or a basis in the land. As a matter of fact, the parking garage that is needed to replace the parking here and to make the office building viable, as well as the public improvements in the plaza, constitute significant dollars that we would treat as our land basis in this project, and that I can tell you as we analyze it from a financial perspective, certainly is what you would substitute for land cost here. That garage would be in the order of $6 million. And the improvements to expand the parking around it, the site work that has to go into it, and then the public improvements out front of the development, it makes a big difference to our pro forma whether there are 130 market rate units or 150 market rate units. It can get to the order on the cost that we're talking about of somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 per door per market rate unit in what would be the acquisition cost of the project. And that really does make a difference in financing the project, which I think is why with the exception of group homes that are sort of funded by nonprofits, or with the exception of 100% affordable projects that are lucky enough to get the 9% tax credits, inclusionary projects are the projects that are mostly accomplishing the affordable housing aims of the state because they're financially viable. But to the degree, like our garage is a fixed cost. The site work that goes into the garage, the site work that goes into expanding the parking on the surface, and all the work that goes into creating the beautiful plaza in front of this development, which I hope the board would see as extraordinary relative to other developments. Those are fixed costs. So as the number of market rate units goes down, that fixed acquisition cost goes up on a per unit basis. And so it really does matter to us. And we certainly, this for us would certainly be found land, so to speak, if we didn't have to replace the parking and continue to have the office building be viable. But that's not the case here. We do have to do that.
Noah, how big is the structured parking?
About 300 spaces right now, Rich. At about 20,000 per space, including the footings and the site work that goes around it, that'd be $6 million.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, are you going to be?
Drop in the bucket for sure.
Yep.
Are you going to be able to have a drawing, maybe to show the board that? I don't even sure that they knew that parking garage was part of this ordeal.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, we've gone specifically to a design build firm that we have used before on prior decks. They've begun to work up a 3D model. In fact, I had my first look at it today. So we can move, Mark and our team can move to put some color and material and to set it in the context of the topography of the site. Certainly prior to the next meeting, and hopefully before then. But yes, we've begun to build up a 3D model of that, Carol.
No, it's Larry. So, one of the things you heard from Rich was the comment about the back and side of the residential. So, I'm not sure if this is how much of a stretch this is for Mark. Put together elevations from the east and west, and if you have anything even preliminary on the structured parking.
That would be, I think that would show the board a lot.
The structured parking double T's in precast spandrel panels?
Yes.
Okay.
Anything more, Noah?
That was it. Thank you.
About Mark, do you have anything more?
That's it. Thanks very much.
Okay, good. Good to have you. All right, I'll open it up to the public now, if they have any questions. We're looking to see you.
Yeah, I do not see any hands raised, but I want to give everybody a fair opportunity, but I don't see any on the shared screen or on my sidebar here, so no public comment.
Okay, very good. Tom, where do you think we should go from here with this concept?
Okay, so I think what we should do, if the board is ready tonight, is perhaps bounce around the idea with Noah about how many units the board would recommend to the township committee, and how many affordable as part of that. I'll call it a maximum number of total units. I also think we're going to need to see, we're going to incorporate the nice fieldstone materials that we saw tonight into the concept plan that we would attach to the ordinance. We probably should sort of get another iteration of that, of the basic concept drawing, of the site plan kind of drawing, and make sure that that shows some very good pedestrian connectivity to the office complex. I think it does show some already, but let's just make sure. And maybe something about the layering of that second story and third, although in inappropriate locations where it may not be already. Maybe Mark could also look at whether the concept of 50 feet is achievable without losing the benefit of the pitched and gabled appearances. But if not, just explain that. And we probably should plan for another meeting, because we need to bring this draft ordinance and draft master plan to a level where the board would say to itself, let's go to public hearing. And I don't think we're quite there yet. So that being said, do we want to talk about the number of units and give them direction, hear their reaction to numbers?
Could I make an observation about that? We started this conversation with KRE knowing that we needed 28 units, or believing that we needed that, and that they would be entitled under COA rules to a 15% set aside unless they agreed to something different. So the 28 units and the 15% set aside is where the 187 units came from. And I only offer that as a point of reference, not in defense of anything, but this conversation started out with an assumption that the project would have a certain scale. And I think they were attracted to the project in part because of what they thought the overall package was. So I'm not saying that the board has to do anything different than what you might be thinking of now, but I'm only trying to put it in perspective in that regard.
Frank, isn't it 28 minus 5?
Wasn't it 23?
No, it wasn't when we started talking to them. We talked to them about doing our whole obligation before we approved that other project.
Right, but
So
now we only need 23.
Now it's 23, right? True.
Yeah.
So 23 drives what, 150?
A little bit.
51.
That's all we need right now. I mean, do we want to put some in the bank, or do we want to do this all over again in 3 years?
I think we want to put some in the bank, Tim, myself.
Well, the biggest reason to think seriously about putting some in the bank is only because here you have a site that has the ability to accommodate what we're talking about.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where the next site comes from. If we owe another 28 units next time around, it would be awfully nice to have knocked down that number by part of what we already did.
Frank,
Yeah, and we'll have to revisit a whole new space. So if we're at 187, I'm sure the guys at GRE, they're very generous. If we went up to a 17.5, we're right at that 33 number of affordable units. That's at the 187 number.
That's correct.
Even at 15, we're putting some in the bank at 187, though.
Yeah, that's at 15.
But I
Why?
I would
Why
not back
start
away.
low?
I think Tim's suggestion that maybe we can do some negotiating there makes a lot of sense.
I think 33 at the 187. I know, Rich, you were saying you wanted, smaller scale, smaller scale. If we were to keep it at the 187, I mean, at getting 33 units, the low moderate, that really helps us in the long run. It really reduces our obligation. Am I right, Larry? Mr. Mayor?
Well, we don't know what the obligation is going to be for the next round, which is 2025. And we've had discussions, and Frank and I have had discussions, and Frank and I have had discussions, and we don't necessarily agree as to how the count is going to happen in 2025, but there will be a new number probably in 2025. What that obligation is going to be, can't tell.
Larry, the 2025 obligation is a number we have to meet through zoning by 2025, or we'll get the number in 2025 and then have some period of time to meet
You'll
it.
get it. You'll get it in 2025. We're meeting the number we have to meet by 2025 with this project and
Okay.
the Elite project.
Right. If this project is zoned, if this master plan goes through, then this would satisfy any obligation on Bedminster through 2025. In 2025, there may be new obligations imposed on us, and it may take some time for those obligations to be calculated. But certainly in 2025 or thereabouts, all towns in New Jersey will be given new numbers. And then a plan to satisfy those affordable housing numbers in effect at that time. So will there be a demand for additional for sale units?
Yeah, apartments.
Never.
There'll be an additional demand for rental units? Will there be a demand for both or an obligation for both on Bedminster? And what scale will that be? Will it be in the hundreds? Will it be in the dozens? Will there be none because of what's done in the past?
Unless the rules change dramatically, the 700 extra units that we have in the bank that were for sale units will certainly continue to count in the future.
Frank,
I'm just looking at this from a numbers perspective, and what occurs to me is that if we can do 175 unit, project with 30 affordable units, that still gives them 145 market units, which is only 10 or 12 less than what they would do at the 187 and 33. So I don't know if the board is in the mood for compromise, or they're comfortable with the 187, understanding that the 187 was driven by 28% being 15% of the overall project. Is that correct, Frank?
That's correct.
So I think if we're going to go 187, I think I want a lot
33.
more affordable.
33.
Yeah, the 33. If we're comfortable with a lesser affordable housing number, then I think the project should be reduced accordingly.
Well,
I agree.
Let me ask you a question. If in fact we were to do that for the next 5 years, those units are market units, right?
No,
No.
they have,
Well,
would
but we
be-
don't need them. Isn't there a way in 5 years if we need them? Okay, we're not
Designate
gonna.
them.
Somebody out.
no, you have to zone them now, and you have to require them in the site plan for them to be enforceable.
If you do that, could they still rent them at market rates for 5 years?
No, you have to deed restrict them from the first day of the CO.
Mark, Noah?
So what I can say is that, so you heard my comment on the basis here. The difference, the project that you're looking at now, 187 units, will basically give you the same look. And I don't think that traffic or other impacts would be really affected. Will give you the same look, and that 33 units on that 187 is something that we could do. And I think that you could, if the board were inclined to recommend, could put some of those units in the bank, and could effectively net a handful more, which on a, as a 15% set aside here, this would be in excess of that, but you could effectively net a handful more out of what is essentially the same bulk on this site here, and certainly the same presentation to the street.
Well, I'll throw something out there.
It's all yours.
187, to me, it's a big number. I mean, I think when this was originally proposed and we were looking at the 15% set aside, that's where 187 was coming from. It's a big number. It was a big number then, it's a big number now. And I'll just say, I think it's probably too much, and I would be willing to sacrifice some of that extra affordable units to reduce that number. I don't know what that reduction would be, but those are my thoughts. Is that I would look to drop the 187 number, and I would look to drop the 33 number.
Because Mayor, presumably we do none of this if we didn't have our affordable housing obligations.
Correct.
And at 23 units, we're looking at roughly 150. When you jump to 187, look, rough math, that's 25% more. And we spend about an hour going through the mass and the scale and concerns about that. And my other concern is that would we necessarily need to satisfy our 2025 obligations, whatever they are, through building? Or would there be another option with respect to buybacks or another way to address that number? So the build option is not the only way we might potentially address those requirements in the future.
Understanding what I've just heard, again, the mass and the presentation to the street really will not change between 187 and 157. And I think that if the number were closer to the latter, I think that we need to go back and we need to sit with Murray and John and see if this is still a project, because the basis for this and the investments that we're putting in here, in the parking deck, in the public space, in a time during which the retail, there is a lot of conversation at our shop of whether this retail is a good idea in its scale right now, but we know it's important to the project. We know the public realm is important to the project. But with COVID looming over us and rents in this state having taken somewhere between a 5 and 10% hit, depending on where you're at, which makes a real difference in debt service. If the number were closer to the latter, I think that we would need to go back to the drawing board on this project and see what we can make work. We've been operating under the assumption of a density of plus or minus 180 up to 100, to get the 28 to 15% would be 187. But that really it's a real perspective from us. And again, this the presentation that you see from the street is not going to change with a reduction. I mean, Mark,
I think I'll chime in here. I mean, I'm listening to the mayor's comments and the Collins comments, and this is a big deal. Okay, it's a big deal, and they have to make those comments, and I think they're right. Maybe we don't need to bank those units. It may make sense to bank them, but like Colin says, we may not need them. So maybe you want to go back to the drawing board. I don't know, but what they're saying, is really from the heart. And it's not that they're, this is a big deal for this town. Okay. That.
So if you do 180 at a straight 15%, it's 154 market units. If you do 187 with the 33 affordable units that Frank started to draft, that's 153. Well, I think it's 153 with the 180 at a straight 15% and 154 with the 187 at 33. So you still get 153, even if you reduce it just to 180. That's less than a 5% reduction overall. And it represents some compromise, Noah. Now, again, it's still probably a little bit larger than I'm comfortable with personally, but it just, my comments about light and air from a design and a conceptual perspective are one thing. The comments that we've all made about massing and scale are other things, but we haven't even talked to the traffic engineer yet about an intersection that already is a D, and those kinds of things. So if we can reduce the scale and scope of this project even fractionally, it's going to be valuable. It may not affect the massing at the streetscape. I get that, and that's fine. We're not concerned about the massing at the streetscape because that's been done very, very thoughtfully. But it's a matter of, size and scale. To me,
Rich, can you repeat? Did you say 30 on 180?
At a straight 15% set aside, all right, would be 27, which
Right.
would give you 153 market units. If you go with what Frank had suggested in 187 and 33, it's 154 market units.
Mhm. Yeah, so from our perspective, that sort of thinking, that does work, Rich, because that, again, when we look at our basis and we look at it on a market rate, because the affordable units are at their very best to break even, but in a building like this, they will not break even. They'll lose money. That the 180 at 15% for 153 market, you're right. It is a lesser overall size of development, but accomplishes the same goals in terms of financial feasibility.
So we're reducing it only 7 units and we're giving up 6 low to moderate units, which I thought, we want to have the smallest impact on the town in the future as well. And you guys know more about the fair housing obligation in 5 years, but if it happens, we can't come back to Mark and no and say, hey, can you throw a couple extra units on there and give us some low to moderate? I'm just worried down the road. I'm a planner. I always want to make sure that, I'm protecting myself in the future. We have an opportunity here to get what we need, maybe, and I know we don't know yet, but at least we'll have it. Where are we going to come up with this again? We're going to have another subcommittee. We're going to find another big piece of property and develop some more to get some more low to moderate, possibly. I mean, we have the ability to do it now. Even at the 187 with 33, now we're going to go to 180. We're just going to reduce it 7 units, but we're giving up 6 low to moderates. I don't know. Hey, and by the way, I don't have a vote on this. I'm an alternate.
I'd like to make a comment. This is Lou. Actually, when I think about this project, everything from the front, nothing changes. The streetscape, the massing, nothing changes. Everything in the back is, residential units. Whether there's 187 or 170 or whatever the number is, I personally feel like it doesn't have that big of an impact on the overall community. And I'm 100% in agreement with Tim right now. We might as well bank as much as we can and give the developers their due, because I think they've really earned this situation. So that's just my feeling.
Well, Lou, I'd like to just follow on that, because when you say give them their due, I don't want to put words in Noah's mouth, but I'm pretty sure that we heard him say that they could do 33 units if they got the 187, which is
Right.
a 17.5% set aside, which is more than the COA rule says they have to do. That sounds like a good deal to me. And like Tim said,
Great deal.
take away a handful of units of all the units and lose a handful of affordable units doesn't seem to make a lot of sense.
All right.
It's 10 more units than we need, guys.
Right, and the difference in 10 units on a project this scale with the way it's set up is nominal.
I agree.
I would agree.
I don't idea of having them in the bank if they come back and say you're going to need more in 15 years.
Got it.
Remember that the streetscape is going to be exactly the same. The access to the residential is in the rear of the property. It's not going to affect the community whether there's another 10 units or
There it is,
12
you Lou.
in the back.
You missed one of my points. The intersection already fails.
But there isn't it part of the
intersection already
obligation that they've got to redesign it anyway?
They are, but they're going to make it, a C minus instead of a D. What could they possibly do?
It's 7.
Actually, I thought that the circulation road was a big part of this whole thing. The outer rim road, the perimeter road to get to 206 South.
I don't want to speak for Oliva, but he was suggesting that the perimeter road wouldn't necessarily decrease the volume at that intersection substantially enough to move the needle that much. Correct me if I'm wrong. Carol, do you remember that conversation?
Say that again, Rich. I'm sorry.
I thought Oliva was suggesting that even with the perimeter road, it wasn't going to reduce the burden on the intersection substantially.
Yeah, that's how I remembered it as well, Rich.
Well, because the right now, the problem on Burnt Mills is the left turning north. The perimeter road will certainly help alleviate the backup from the intersection.
Yeah.
But and I'm not even sure it's a D. I don't recall if it's a D or it might be even worse than that during the morning. It's the left turning north.
North, right. That's the problem.
Well, but it's also southbound turning right. The whole intersection's a mess.
Southbound turning right is a mess, and that's something I've actually discussed with Chuck Olivo directly. That would also need to be part of improvements to that intersection.
Yeah, it's as the mayor says, it's the backup though going north there. I go to Burnt Mills Road in like 8 o'clock in the morning, and it's always backed up all the way. So that road wouldn't really help that.
Right, and Chuck did, and Chuck had conversations with the county, and I believe the KRE did as well with both the county and the state to make improvements to the signaling at the intersection, some timing changes, some minor geometry changes, restriping. I think Noah had talked about probably eliminating the right turn only on 202, 206 South that brings you into bed 1. So you wouldn't be, you would essentially affect what should be 2 southbound lanes going from north of the Burnt Mills intersection to the south side of the intersection. So you would have 2 through lanes on 202, 206 South. We don't have that now because of the way the lanes are set up. That would be a big improvement on the southbound traffic.
And the other comment that I would make with respect to,
there's still the issue of the right turn, as George said, right by Colonial Liquors.
Yeah.
That the geometry there just doesn't work.
No.
And the 2 problems are making the right from 202 onto Burnt Mills, and from Burnt Mills making the left onto 202 North.
Right.
Okay, but I assume you guys, when the subcommittee picked this location, they knew of the problems with that intersection, right?
Yes.
And as an opportunity to fix those problems.
Okay, all right, but so that's a separate, I guess, conversation, is it? Then whether it's 180 units or 187 units, it's still a failing grade intersection.
the other thing to keep in mind, I think, is that we still have the master plan redesign or redevelopment of AT&T boating in the future. That's a massive 100-acre site. How big is that, Larry?
130?
I don't have the acreage in front of me, but Ron Kennedy does.
I think it's 180.
So, that's a massive site. And if we're going to redevelop that, we're going to have an opportunity to garner at least as many affordable units there. Again, when and if we have to do it.
Yeah, that's a big unknown though, right? We have no inkling on what's happening.
I think it's pretty certain it's not going to be an AT&T knock for the next 10 years.
Really?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I mean, do we have word of that? Did somebody say something?
They've been shrinking on the site for the last 20 years, so they're not growing.
All right. I don't know.
Again, I think we cross that bridge when we come to it myself.
Yeah, I'd agree.
But again, we will have opportunities in going forward, and whether we bank 6 spots or 10 spots at this point in time, I don't know if it's going to make that much difference in addressing whatever our 4th round requirements are.
Well, I was like looking at the opportunity at hand, and I think this would be a good opportunity. Looking at us right here, 187 with 33, that's an extra 10 in the bank. I don't know. That's something I guess needs to be decided. That's, I guess, the question at hand now. Does that need to be put in the ordinance?
It should be put in the ordinance. This is Tom. And we should, it doesn't have to be tonight, okay? I very much, I think the dialogue and discussion with Noah and Mark and all of you, it was very helpful tonight. Some of you have been very quiet, so I respect that you would have your own separate opinions.
But Tom, we're so close.
You're so
we
close.
to
You're so
deciding?
close.
You want to start this all up again?
No, but I think it's if you're ready, I might be a way to just poll yourselves about what. But I don't want to push you. I want you to feel comfortable. You have enough information too.
We can't be ready without hearing from Nick Strakoff.
That's right. That's
Yeah, I'll settle everything. I was wondering if there was a number such as the number of market units that are at the boundary of a profitable project versus not. Is there a number like that we could then play with about how many market restricted units?
Nick Strakoff, you sound a lot like Rich Travellini.
Nick, I think the answer to that is the 153. That's the number that we've been working with. It's the number that we've been planning this project around. The public improvements, like I said, in front of this, the traffic improvements and the parking deck are making this a tight job. This is not something where we have a whole lot of room.
Okay, so that's the minimum.
When I first got familiar with this project, it was my understanding that we were going with 180 units, and we needed to make our 28 affordable housing units. And that's why we were considering this in the first place, because that was our obligation to do that. So I feel comfortable with going with those numbers. I understand KRB's position that going much lower, actually, I did think we were going to reduce it since we already picked up 5 units, but I could still feel familiar or feel comfortable with the 180 units as we planned in the very beginning. We'd still have 5 extra units, and that's more than what we really need. And we have no idea what we're going to need 5 years from now. We have no idea. We don't know, as the mayor said, whether it's going to be condos that we need, whether it's apartments we need, whether it's nothing. We just don't know what those numbers are going to be. So to try to second guess it, it just doesn't make sense to me. I think we should stick with our original plan and go with that.
I agree with Carol completely. I mean, they're offering to, you know, to help us with this. I think it's something we need to move forward on. And also the nature of the property, you know, it's in an area that's surrounded by highways and main roads and things like that. I really think that's what we should do.
I mean, this
So
is,
we're willing to give up 5 extra low moderates for 7 units.
yeah, but this is a big project.
But 7 units, that's the difference, 180 to 187.
This
We're
is,
going to give up 5 low to moderates.
this is a very big project for Bedminster. And we have to try to have the residents understand what we're up against here. We have to, you know, provide these units. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing the project at all. So,
Exactly. That's why it's so important to get these low and moderates, so we don't have to do it again.
but we will have some obligation, and we don't know what it's going to be. We have other properties that in the future, we would be able to handle our obligation, whatever it will be. So I think we should take what we have now and deal with what we have to at this particular point in time. So that's all I have to say. And everybody has their opinion, I understand, but we'll go forward.
Okay, I have just one more comment. You know, Tim hit on a note. You know, this is an opportunity, and opportunities don't knock very often. This is an opportunity to get a beautiful area that's sort of a destination for retail and for other uses for the community, as well as get our affordable housing and then bank some. So I'm kind of back to the 187, the original project, because I think opportunity doesn't knock every day, and you have to just take advantage of it when you can. That's just my opinion.
So I just want to come back to something that Collins had mentioned, is that we don't have to make a final decision tonight.
No.
We all got something to take back with. So I would suggest that we table the 180 versus 187, 28 versus 33, and whatever those numbers are. I think we certainly heard from KRA that 153 market is sort of is a standard. And so it's playing math on top of 153. I suggest that we table this for our next master plan discussion. But I do want to come back to Tom and Frank on the perimeter road and the traffic issues, and to the extent those should be addressed in the ordinance.
Larry, it strikes me that the next conversation we have would be well informed if we had Chuck involved, or reviewing the information ahead of time and both on that perimeter road and what the difference in these numbers of units means through the intersection. I think the board would be more comfortable knowing that we had that expert opinion.
I'm really coming back to the drafting of the ordinance. So for a long time, the planning board or land use board side of this has been suggesting that there be some public access for use of the perimeter road. And this is really a question for Tom. Should that be incorporated? And if so, how incorporated into the ordinance? And then again, for improvements at the intersection.
Sure, we can do something to incorporate that. And we probably should. The concept plan that I saw that you've seen, but you have not, we haven't incorporated it yet. It shows the subdivision of the ring road from the total tract, and it shows the approximately 7 acre lot for the mixed use, and I don't know the acreage, 10 or so acres, whatever it is, for the office, and shows the road being a separate tract, separate lot. And the concept is that it will probably be a private, the own street with a public access easement, but not duty to maintain. But you're both right that, and Frank's kind of right. You mean if you had comments and questions about what did Chuck say? So Chuck is our traffic expert about the traffic and the consequences. What improvements we're going to make at the intersection. I think that could be something that the mayor has been asking Chuck to focus in on. And that ought to be incorporated into your ordinance. And that is, the KRE does commit to do that intersection, so that's a good thing. So that would be fine in the ordinance.
Frank and Tom, how do we, and this has less to do with the ordinance and more to do with the project as a whole, when we're dealing with traffic studies in COVID, how do we correct for that? Because while that intersection is bad today, it was a whole lot worse a year ago today.
Right.
Right. And so
I don't know, Chuck would be the expert and maybe Paul knows, but I would assume you don't use this year's statistics.
No, two ways, Anna. First of all, just so you know, like when we began this conversation a couple of years ago with the master plan subcommittee, traffic was the first thing that we had to focus on. We knew that was a big emphasis here with the township. So we did all the traffic counts and all the studies pre-COVID. So the numbers that we're working with are pre-COVID. If we needed to update those numbers, we've just started, I don't do it, but the traffic engineering firm that we're working with has a model that they're using now, which models these things out theoretically versus going out and taking actual counts. But we did do the counts pre-COVID at the start of this process.
Right.
Now, even though it seems like a D, it's a B minus.
no, it's not even a B minus.
But Rich is correct that even with the improvements, it basically doesn't reduce the level of service. It keeps it equal or slightly better than it is. It's not going to make it go to a free flowing level A, so.
It won't go free flowing, but I think if we were to look again at the traffic report, which again was consensus with Gary Dean and with Chuck, in which DOT preliminarily gave us the nod on, subject to going in for the signal timing permits, there were some significant improvements in some of the movements, in particular some of the most difficult movements, southbound on 202 and the left going north off of Burnt Mills. So
that's correct. And the phasing helped accomplish that.
Absolutely. The phasing is a big deal.
So yes, it should be in the ordinance. It is on the drawing. I want that drawing to be part of this ordinance because it does have a lot of detail on it, but we're getting there. We also like that new elevation with the fieldstone, so that'll be on it, in it. So we probably need a meeting in about a month or a month and a half. I don't know, whenever we need another meeting with the board. So Carol, I'd defer to you about when. I don't think our December, I don't know what our December's like. I know it's not good on the 3rd.
No, and I think, don't we have, Paul, we have it already.
Both of them are committed. Yeah.
For March, so I mean, do we need another special meeting?
I see.
You can always ask Ron Kennedy to defer.
I don't think it's going to happen.
Again, huh?
So that Carol can try to build a consensus, should we be like sending Carol in some information about what we would be amenable to in terms of the numbers? Because I don't hear a consensus about the numbers.
I don't think you should send anybody like emails. You could send them to me, but I don't think that's going to be the way we're going to do it. I think it's going to be that we'll make a presentation to you of what Larry and maybe the subcommittee and Noah and Frank and Paul come up with as a recommended max and a recommended percentage. You know, I really use percentages, not I don't know, not market units. But I don't want to criticize the concepts that were discussed tonight either. So if you want to talk more, we can decide it tonight. But Larry suggested let's wait. So you don't do it by emails.
I would wait and let everyone think on it.
Yeah, I agree.
Good idea. Let people think about it. As far as a meeting, I mean, we're getting into holidays and things as well. I mean, if we want to do a special meeting, I know we want to continue to keep this moving. We don't want it to drag. This, 6 months will go by in no time here. So,
So you have 1525 use variance on the 10th, I think. If carrying it to the 10th. So in fact, if we had to tonight, if we know that 1525 is carried to December 10th, I think it is. Is that right, Janine?
Yes.
Yes, and on December 3rd, we have Trump and Bedminster Farms. The January meeting, we already said we don't know when the township committee meeting will be, so we don't know if we can schedule January 7th. So realistically, our first definite meeting is January 14th.
You could have a special on, I don't know if it works for everybody, but you might try the 17th. Yeah, it's kind of tight.
Well, here, before we talk about a special, for Noah and Mark, how soon do you think you could actually get those, the east and west elevations and a preliminary drawing on the structured parking?
2 weeks? No, I think that's fair.
yeah, see, that brings us to Thanksgiving. That's not good. It's getting tight here.
Quick question. Frank, does the ordinance have to have a specific number in it, or can it have a range? I don't know if, just hypothetically, if we don't know between 180 and 187, can the ordinance say between 180 and 187, and then we decide that at a later point, at least you get the ordinance created? Is that possible?
There are cases I've seen where you could have a minimum and a maximum, which is basically the range you just described. So you would be bracketing the zone within which whatever that set aside percentage was would be applied. If it was 180 units, you'd lose one affordable unit if you went with the 17.5% set aside compared to the 187.
So in the ordinance, you could say units, amount of units between 180 to 187, and then the, low to moderate between, 128 and 33.
I think you'd want to set a percentage so that regardless of what total number of units you got, you'd get your 17.5%.
17. Okay, so between 180 and 187 at a 17.5%. Okay.
I'd be curious about Tom's opinion about your question as well.
No, I agree with Frank's recommendation. But it doesn't even, you could even use a different number. So don't, in other words, a bigger range. Let's think about it again before the next meeting. Maybe you'll have an epiphany, and everybody will say that's what it should be.
Yeah. Let's just come back. So 2 weeks to get those drawings, because if we're going to look.
Yeah, I want to say, I think that's a little ambitious to get those drawings. I think that I think we could probably provide like a representative sketch of what one of the elevations, east or west, would look like. I think they're going to be pretty similar back in that area. And I think but I do think within 2 weeks, we could probably get a good sense of the parking garage as well.
Okay, and it would also be good to see a complete site layout showing both the Burnt Mill side and then the Bed 1 side as well.
Yes.
Okay. And the reason I think having the east and west elevations, because it addresses Rich's comments about air and light in the back.
Yeah. Okay. Some of.
But Larry, 2 weeks is
And I'm not trying
Thanksgiving.
to poo-poo. Some of what we're doing now is getting pretty deep into exhibits we'd normally prepare for site plan and take quite a lot of time to. So
Well,
let us go back and see what we can do on that.
would the board be satisfied if we noted on the plan some of those things that I sketched out to show the kind of articulation we're imagining in plan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're not looking for like final elevations,
No.
just the conceptual, your conceptual response to Rich's area.
Yeah, to his concerns, yes.
So that's good. So I think a lot of that might be able to be addressed in plan because okay, good.
Okay, let's go back to a date. Who's available on the 17th of December? I know it's getting close to holidays, but can we make it on that date? Because we're getting really tight here.
We're gonna be locked in our basement for Christmas anyway.
That's right.
We, of
Mandate
course,
is
will make
coming.
ourselves
What an
available.
optimist.
That's is the 17th okay for a special meeting?
Works for me.
Okay for me.
I mean,
I'm good. Yeah.
I'll be
I'm
here.
good.
All right, so let's make it on that day then. The professionals, are they available?
Tom is.
I should be as well.
I'm supposed to be at the zoning board in Chatham. I'll try to get Joanna to cover it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's aim for the 17th then, okay?
Yeah, that's 4 weeks. Okay. We'll give you guys enough time to.
Give Mark a little time to work on this and we can still get it in before the end of the year. We need to keep, working at this and not let time go by. Okay, thank you, Noel. Mark,
Thank you guys again.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you very much, Noah and Mark.
thank you.
Good job.
Everyone. Ron.
Rich, what is the eye of the tiger thing
Yeah,
there?
what's the,
Is this an inside Bedminster Planning
Clemson.
Board joke that we're missing?
No, it's
Clemson.
animal abuse on behalf of Rick.
Okay.
You're watching Tiger at the Masters today, that's all.
Touchdown, Jesus.
He's a Clemson guy.
He's a Clemson number 2 or number 3.
That's right. Okay, thank you all.
Good night, everybody.
Okay, good
Good
night.
night, everybody.
Good night, guys.
Okay, next meeting is December 3rd. We have Bedminster Farms. And then we go into Lamington Farm. Is that the same day?
Currently, they're both scheduled for the same day, yes.
Whoa. Oh.
Ron's going to make sure it's only one of them.
Okay.
Working on it. We'll
And,
figure it out.
Good night, Ron.
2, 1, or none.
That's all the options we have.
Okay, and then we have 1525 Bedminster on December 10th. So,
Right, and let's just make another announcement. So I think it's obvious, but that case was carried, and it's carried to December 10th at 7 p.m. by remote meeting, and it's not. There will be no further notices for that.
You haven't received anything from
No,
the application, right?
no.
No, we have not.
Oh, it's a zoning board, so I shouldn't even be
You don't
talking
know.
about it anyway.
you don't know anything.
You didn't hear anything, Larry.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn.
Motion adjourned.
Seconded.
That's Rich.
Good night.
Good
And
night.
Good night, good
thanks.
night, everybody.
Night.
Good night, all.
Good night, everybody.
Right.
Oh, I would be so much happier if everybody was back in the same place. I can't stand this.